We are moving into a conversation about the cost of electricity in the country. We know that we should be expecting the cost of power to come down at the end of this month, March. Before then, it hasn't happened, so we'll know why it's not happening. We'll have our guest in the studio. Before we introduce him, City, today's proverb.
From Gabon. When the bee comes to your house, let her drink beer.
When the bee comes to your house, let her
Start there. Let her drink beer. You may want to visit the bee in their house one day. Yes.
So, be hospitable.
Please.
Be kind.
Be kind.
To that nagging, buzzing bee.
Threatening. Because most people see bees, their hands start flapping.
Yes.
Little knowing that if they simply stood still, the bee would just go along its merry way. Yes.
Oh, and now, you said the bee.
Yes.
Let the bee drink beer, or the wife in the house drink beer. And why is the bee a female?
Serve the bee. Okay, so when the bee comes to your house, katia yeye pombe, chai, uji, whatever.
Yeah.
Serve the bee.
You mean when you go to visit one day you're going to go to the bee's house also. But anytime you find the bee coming to your house, they usually look for something sweet and land on it.
Yeah.
If you have a glass, they'll be on the rim of the glass, isn't it? Yes. Now, most people will not allow the bee to do that. They'll want to chase away the bee.
Yeah.
We're saying, just let the bee go about its business. It'll eventually go away. One day you may need to go and visit the bee.
I'm not sure whether I would want to go to visit the hive, but anyway.
But do you
know, people go to visit the hive.
And you know, yes, even if you don't, they go on your behalf.
Yes.
Okay.
So that you don't get stung when you go to the hive, start by being good when the bee comes to you.
I think that makes sense.
No.
Yeah, thank you.
If we all became kind to one another, we'd get free honey.
And there'll be no fuel, and there'll be no fuel shortages.
And there'll be no fuel shortages. It's a conversation we're going to have now with Isaac Ndereva, our friend, electricity billing expert. He's here with us in the studio. Let's just remind you, on the 12th day of December 2021, at Uhuru Gardens in Nairobi, newly refurbished Uhuru Garden, wearing military regalia, President Uhuru Kenyatta, His Excellency President and Commander-in-Chief of Kenya's Defense Forces, delivered his speech. And he concluded with this: fellow Kenyans, ladies and gentlemen, now I will end my address by keeping a promise I made. By doing what? Keeping a promise
he made.
On the 20th of October 2021, I directed the Ministry of Energy to fast-track implementation of the recommendations of the Presidential Task Force on Power Purchase Agreements. I am pleased to note that the pathway to reduce the cost of electricity by over 30% is on course. In honor of this pledge to the nation, and in response to the concerns over the high cost of electricity raised by both individual consumers and enterprises, I am pleased to announce to the nation that the reduction of the cost of electricity will be implemented in 2 tranches of 15% each, with the first 15% achieved through initial actions focusing on system and commercial losses to be reflected in the December bills, and a further 15% reduction in the first quarter of 2022. In realizing the second tranche of the reduction in power bills, I note that the Ministry of Energy has initiated engagements with independent power producers aimed at renegotiation of power purchase agreements so as to give better value for money for consumers. I urge the power producers to demonstrate goodwill as we seek to make our energy sector a greater catalyst of our national development. The President made this pledge. In the first quarter of 2022, there should be a further 15% reduction. This is following the reduction that should have reflected in the December bills. We know it didn't, but then sometime in January, some 15% reduction was announced. So here we are. That's why we say it is not the 14th of April. We are still in the first quarter of the year. So we're in the 14th of March. Until that day, that EPRA or the Minister for Energy or the chairperson or the MD of Kenya Power or whoever, or even the president himself, announces this 15% reduction in power.
We are still in
quarter 1.
Well, now, what I want you to understand is, number one, let me start by saying that there are a few things that we need to understand. First of all, we want to give credit to the government, but we also need to understand that in 2013, between 2013 to 2017, the government had promised to reduce the cost of electricity. And for sure, we were expecting some reduction. Now, between 2013 and 2017, there was an increase by 20% instead of a
reduction.
Then, between 2017 to 2021 December, there was an increase by 22%. So indeed, the whole increase was 42%. So even without really...
This is in the first, how many years?
In the first 5 years.
Of Jubilee?
Yes.
Okay.
There was an increase by average of 20%. The next one, the last 4 years, has been an increase of 22%. So that's a 42% increase. Now, if we want to be taken back to 2013, before we get promised about a reduction, we first need to get a reduction of 42%. Now, well and good, they were trying to attempt to reduce by 33%. We got something they called 15%, which is neither here nor there, because, of course, the 15% was supposed to be based on the price in September, which was 24. But then when they reduced, it was already 25.almost 9. So never mind, that was a good effort. But then what was supposed to be understood is that was it supposed to be sustainable? And what we are saying as a society is that is not sustainable. Why? Because...
What is not sustainable?
That reduction is not sustainable. Beyond 1 year.
You cannot sustain a 15% reduction.
It cannot. Beyond 1 year.
Please explain why.
I'll tell you the reason. One, we really appreciate that, first of all, people are not made to understand what was reduced. But I'll tell them one thing, that there was a reduction of taxation on Forex and inflation. That reduction resulted to 1% reduction. So if we are talking about a 3%, that is 1%. Then we are still getting taxation on the consumption and something called the fuel cost. So those are the two things that are now being taxed. Now, that reduction, we can be able to track and say, yes, from now onwards, we are not taxing Forex and inflation. Good enough. What else was reduced? We are sure of one thing. Before we even started this discussion, Kenya Power was complaining that it needs some increase by 20%. So now, how did they manage to reduce? So what we have found out, or what we are trying to analyze, is that this reduction was funded. Funded by what? Like there is some subsidy that was given to run for about a year, and then this government will be out. Then the next government is going to sort itself out.
Now, you have lost us. So there was a 15% reduction announced.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
In the cost of power.
Yes.
Initially, just like the president said, this was going to be in reviewing systemic efficiencies and all. So where did the 15% come from? So you're saying first, Forex and inflation, no taxation, that saved something.
Good.
Where else?
Nowhere else we can tell. And we are also technical people. Let me tell you, when we talk of that there's going to be a reduction because of system losses addressing, system losses only account for 5.85 shillings. I mean, what is affected by system losses?
Explain what system losses are.
System losses, as I have always explained, is where Kenya Power loses power while trying to take it.
While trying to transmit it.
To transmit it to the people.
And what causes these losses? And how is that?
It's because of the transmission lines. Because
if they are faulty.
If not really faulty, you must have some drop. You must have some losses along transmission.
You must.
So this is technically how it will happen.
And in fact, it's allowed to be 14.9%.
Okay.
But now it was gazetted to be 24.5, I guess. I mean, they normally experience 24.5, but again, EPRA allowed them to take it up to 19.9. Now, the 19.9 is affected on the fuel cost, inflation, Forex, and Warma. The total cost for those four items is 5.85. Now, reduce, right? No, 5.85 Kenya shillings per kilowatt. Yeah.
Per kilowatt.
Yeah, that is the total. Now, if this is 5.85, you want to now say you reduce by 10% of that cost.
Of this 5.8?
Yes. What is that 10%? How much can you get? Even if you reduce from 24.5, you bring it to 14.9, they agreed. That's around 10%, isn't it? So 5.85, or the cost that is normally affected, if you put like 10%, are you really going to get that 3%?
Well, let me ask you this question. Simply as a layman,
Yes.
I get a bill. They usually itemize it
Yes.
very clearly. What really is the cost of power if you remove all the deductions that the government lumps onto it?
Right now, it has always been 15.8. Let's talk about what was there currently. It was
15.8.
For the let's talk about the domestic ordinary.
Yes.
There are about 9 tariffs. We normally concentrate, and what the society really aims at doing is to at least bring the person who is paying the highest to at least be considered. I know there are also people who are paying around 17 shillings and all that. Those are domestic lifeline. Let's not go into those details. But let's talk about, even the president may not have known that there are all those tariffs, by the way, because he said they are going to reduce the cost of power from 24 shillings to 16 shillings.
Okay.
So now the reduction was effected not from 24 shillings.
So what in effect was he reducing?
He was reducing, I guess
The overall cost, what was he reducing?
he was reducing, according to even this report, it was from 24 shillings to 16 shillings of kilowatt hour, Kenya shillings per kilowatt hour.
Okay.
And that is only one tariff out of 9. So it follows then that the same percentage reduction should follow on all the other tariffs.
Then you get a wholesome reduction.
Yes.
But if you reduce on one of the 9
Yes.
and the others are constant, then in essence you haven't really reduced
No,
anything.
actually, all of them were reduced. It was taken that it's the same percentage to be applied on all.
But was it applied?
It was.
So we actually had a genuine reduction.
We had a genuine reduction
Yes.
of 15%. According to the society, it's around 13. Because we want to start, the reduction should have started from 24 and not from 25.9. So, but never mind, we can't complain too much. But the issue is, all of them were reduced. But how sustainable is that reduction? Other than this 1% we got from the reduced taxation.
But
what else?
But Ndereva, what then makes you say that it is not sustainable? What is it about this reduction that is untenable?
It's only that sometimes the public is not inquisitive enough. But we should have asked, this Kenya Power that was complaining, how comes they have managed to reduce, and yet they are still making a profit? Now, let me tell you, what the government does, and it's the same thing that it did with the fuel, that you come here and you say, the citizens want a reduction from this to this. So we are going to get some money and give that person who's selling that commodity or that service. We give them this money so that they can cover that reduction for the time being. That reduction cannot go beyond 1 year, and expect some further gazettement of prices immediately after the new government takes over.
No, but we don't need to wait. We've seen fuel increases. Yes. That we've already seen. So,
Is it possible to reduce the system inefficiencies at Kenya Power, which would then actually get us to realize actual and long-lasting drop in cost of fuel?
It is possible, but I've always said that it takes a lot of change of infrastructure. It also takes a lot of rethinking about the last mile connectivity. I have always said the last mile connectivity is one thing that has brought a lot of problems. Because in you trying to transmit very little power from your substation to a person who is going to consume very little, you are losing more than how much you are going to sell. That is a problem. But again, during these Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs by the UN, it has actually documented that every country must have a deliberate attempt to reduce the cost of power, but at the same time also increase access. Now, that balance is a bit sensitive.
okay.
Yeah.
When I get a bill,
Yes.
what portion of that bill comprises taxes?
Around 58%, depending on it varies from one tariff to another, but 58%.
It's 58%.
Yes.
If we round it off, 60.
Yes.
So 60% of my bill is taxes.
Yeah, sorry, 58% is the consumption. So the balance of 42
42
is
is the taxes.
the taxes.
Now, So what you're telling me, in essence,
Yes.
since it's the government who decides what they're going to tax and how much they're going to tax,
Yes.
so in reality, they were able to actually reduce the cost of electricity.
Did they reduce the tax?
My point.
They didn't reduce. And that's why I'm
My
saying
point.
it should have been gazetted that this is what have been reduced so that it is sustainable. Even when the next government comes, they will be able to understand that this is where we are. So anything else is just going to be funded. Because even as a society, nobody has come to tell us that this is what we have done.
You see why I raised that issue, Eric? Why I raised that issue, Mr. Ndereva, is this. I am looking at our electricity cost. Some of our electricity is produced by generators.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yes.
They use fuel.
They use fuel, yes.
Now, it's a song and dance that has gone on for the longest time. Rates that were supposed to be paid to these people, whether they're producing power or not, etc., etc., etc.
Yes.
Kenji, all the power producing units that we have, whether it is solar, whether it is
Wind.
whatever.
Yes.
In all these discussions, the one thing that we know is a constant is that some fuel is used. Now, whenever fuel is used, the mwananchi, that is us,
Yeah.
we pay for fuels in more ways than one. Where am I going with my discussion? I'm talking about double taxation. If you increase the price of fuel, you are going to ensure that I'm paying more for the food I eat because it has to be transported.
Yeah.
I'm going to pay more for transportation. I'm going to pay more for everything.
Yeah.
In addition to that, I am going to pay more for electricity. But I am paying for the same thing. Meaning, the taxation that you're talking about, in reality, to me, we're talking about power, but the burden of taxation is infinitely more than that 42% that you're talking about.
Yeah.
To
Yes.
the common mwananchi.
You're right. Because, in fact, one thing we are also concerned as a society is the fuel cost has always been in fact, in November, it was 4.21 Kenya shillings per kilowatt hour. Now, December, January, February, March has been 4.63, something that has never happened. So, since it was stuck at that high of 4.63, it means that perhaps it should have even come to 3.6 something, 2.5 something. But you see that now they decided that it's 4.63 and we are stuck there. Why? And the generation by thermos keeps on varying every month.
Explain something to me. Do we produce enough electricity to meet the needs of the consumption in this country?
Yes, we do. In fact, we have some excess.
So, if I'm to use the simple laws of supply and demand, it means we have more supply than we have demand.
Yes,
Now,
exactly.
those laws dictate, therefore, that the prices should actually drop. How then, in our case, do we have the converse happening, where the prices are going up, and yet the supply is more than the demand? How does this happen?
Because you only have one supplier.
You see, the challenge is that
Market forces we talk about will introduce
you
competition.
have, in fact, when you demand less and you have more surplus, that's the time you pay more because you also have to pay those who are on standby. Yet it has to be divided by the consumed unit in a country.
Do you know that we are rewriting the laws of supply and demand in this country, even as we go along?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It is inverse in this country.
No. This is a country where the supply exceeds demand, and so it costs you more.
Yes. For electricity, that is the
Yes,
key.
you say, and you're paying for the excess.
And by the way, it is the same the whole world. Yeah, when you don't utilize, like there's a time the German government was paying consumers to use power because it could have been more expensive for them not to use. There is such a case. So the whole world, if you have some installed capacity that you're not using, that becomes a problem.
You have investment, and you've got to pay for this investment.
Yes.
There's installed capacity.
Yes.
It is sitting there, and you've got to fund for it.
I understand it perfectly well.
So now here we are. But then also, if we look at all our installed capacities and the mix
Yes.
of our power, so we have, what's the biggest, hydro or
Hydro.
geothermal?
I think geothermal is almost overtaking now.
So let's say geothermal,
Yes.
and then we go into hydro, and this is the water dams,
Yes.
the Seven Forks and the others.
Yes.
And then we go into, is it wind?
There is wind,
That comes in next.
Yeah.
From Lake Turkana
electric wind turbine.
and the others.
Yes.
And then now we'll come into thermal and solar.
Yes.
So thermal and solar are small contributors to our energy mix.
Yes. Yes.
Our bigger energy mix is actually coming from renewables.
Yes.
geothermal, water, wind.
And wind, yes.
Why is it that every time we talk about the cost of power, we then come in and say, oh, it's costing us so much because of the thermal generators? Why?
Well, you see, first of all, even those renewables are not very cheap, especially if you would have expected wind to be the cheapest. But again, the way the PPAs were designed, and I think they will be looked at.
What is a PPA?
A PPA is power purchase agreement. You remember this report that was being done? I had come here when you were not around, and there was some power purchase agreements.
This is the task force that looked at the power purchase agreements.
Yes. And the recommendations by the PPA's task force, we said that whatever they had said, I think they lacked on one thing, to analyze the cost of what they are saying. Because if they were saying about the PPAs, and we say the PPAs can only reduce a very small percentage, even if you scrap them off, you stop buying power at 8.2, you start buying at 5.48 like Kenji. We said there is a certain reduction that can come from there, and it was coming to around 12%. Now, you now come to reducing the transmission losses. You will get 3%. The maximum you can get is going to be 2.65, I guess. Yeah. So now, if you add 12, which is the PPAs, then you add the reduction as a result of transmission losses, which is 2.65%. Where else will you go? You can only go to taxation. I mean, so even when they were recommending, they should have said that the portion that we are trying to talk about of the bill on the PPAs, we can only get this amount. On these transmission losses, we are only going to get 2.65%. So we have recommended 33, but we can only see 15 here. And even these transmission losses, it's going to take about 5 years to at least address that, because it takes time.
But why 5 and why not 10? Or
well,
3?
For
or
a good
7?
performing government,
Yes.
is you just have to redo the infrastructure.
You're talking about the term of a presidency.
Yes, I always
or the
tie that
cycle of-
even most contracts for the politicians is supposed to be 5 years. So now, as a result, I would say that I give you 5 years. So because it is also being funded by a government, you have some structures that are also political. So give it 5 years. But now, that will be 2.65. Or rather, is just the 10% of 5.85 shillings per kilowatt hour. That's the maximum. So now, even if they would have said, we remove the PPAs by these private producers, if you remove all of them and you are left with Kenji alone, you could only reduce 12%. So now, if you have struck the PPAs, if then you have reduced the transmission losses, you have 15%. What is this other? They had not talked of any other that was substantial. So other than just taxation. And that's why I said, if there is it's not going to be a reduction on taxation, actually scrapping off, I will keep on coming here and saying that, the same. It will never happen.
It will never happen.
Even if you see that reduction, I'm telling you, and I am here, and I will come here again, and I tell you, that reduction was artificial reduction.
It's not sustainable.
It is not sustainable.
It's a political statement.
Yeah. But for the 1%, I can defend that is going to be sustainable. The 1% as a reduction of no avoiding taxing forex and inflation. Yeah.
It can only be sustainable, though, if the next administration comes and decides not to claw back on that. It just takes the government to decide, but I need money. Tax forex.
And by the way, let me tell you, in our own circles, we calculated and found that for Kenya Power to have effected this reduction for a year, there is something like 26 billion that was supposed to be funded. You see, it's easy for a government to do that. That for these people to keep quiet while we are in office, take this 26
Put
billion.
some 26 billion there.
Put some 26 billion, and then for 12 months, these people will have sorted that. Then watanyamaza kidogo, because we have seen that this is not going to be possible. Then they told the task force team, now, Gordon Kihalangwa, go and find out how we are going to effect this. And then he goes there, and then they start explaining, you see, the maximum we can reduce on the transmission losses is going to be 2.65%. The maximum we can get from the PPAs is going to be 12%. Then he asked, what else? Then he's told, now nothing else. Then you will start sacking people. You need to lay off people in Kenya Power. This is not.
But
It is not sustainable. Let's take a break, City.
Please.
28 minutes to 9, Kenya's biggest conversation. We're live on KTN Home, SpiceFM, and also on YouTube and Facebook. Having a conversation with Isaac Ndereva, who is an electricity billing expert and executive director of the Electricity Consumer Society of Kenya. We are talking about why we haven't seen the further reduction of 15% in the cost of power as promised by the president by the end of the first quarter of the year. We are in March, we have said. We shall remain in March until we see a reduction of power bills. But we are also seeking to understand where would this reduction come from. Keep it here for that conversation coming up. Good morning.
This is the Situation Room.
Our guest is Isaac Ndereva. He's an electricity billing expert and executive director of the Electricity Consumer Society of Kenya. We are talking about why we don't see the drop in power prices as promised by the president. So the big issue here, even what the task force said, is we need to renegotiate with independent power producers.
Yes.
And then we're going to have a significant reduction. And the president pleaded with the IPPs to be patriotic and look at how much they can then renegotiate and drop their costs. But if you actually look critically, Isaac, at the PPPs, the bigger chunk of power production comes from Kenji.
Exactly.
And government has a stake in Kenji. Now, even when you go to geothermal, where there are some independent power producers, they have a link to Kenji. If you go to, there's a link to Kenji. Is it really possible to look at the independent power producers and see a reduction in power costs?
Thank you. I think you have analyzed that, and that is important to know that Kenji actually supplies the biggest portion. And indeed, it supplies at the last year's report we found was supplying at 5.48. But then because of the other IPPs, the price had gone up to 8.2 shillings per kilowatt hour. That is the price that they were selling to Kenya Power. Now, and we said even if we remove the IPPs that are selling to Kenya Power other than the Kengen, the price is going to be 5.48. Or rather, if they renegotiate, the IPPs can only come to 5.48. Now, how much reduction is that?
That is the baseline set by Kengen anyway, right?
Yeah, yeah. And it's also good to imagine that you can just tell them that we are not signing any PPA that is going to be beyond 5.48 shillings. Now, even if you bring it to 5, you're only going to get 3.2 shillings per kilowatt hour. What percentage is that? We said that is 12%. Now, hoping that that will happen, or rather, let's expect that that is what made us get a reduction of 15% that we got. Then we have closed the issue of the IPPs. Where else are we going? We said we are going to the system losses, technical and commercial losses. How much is that affecting us? It's only affecting 5.85 on the cost of electricity. So we can only manage to reduce from 24.5 to 14.9, approximately 10%. So 10% of 5.85 is 0.585 Kenya shillings. That is 2.65%. Where else can we go? I mean, unless we be given power for free. I mean, in terms of if Kenya Power is going to be given power for free.
If it's going to be given power by the producers
otherwise,
for free.
it can only be taxation.
Is Kengen charging the same amount for what it generates using the old hydro dams and the same for what it's generating in the newly installed geothermal plants?
No, it doesn't charge the same. Yeah.
What is the most expensive Kengen power?
I'm not sure, but I would, of course, I expect it would be the Kipevu 1 and Kipevu 3, which is a thermal.
All right.
That would be the most expensive.
Why?
Of course, thermal is expensive.
It's burning the fuel oils.
You are burning fuel.
There's a reason why I'm asking the question. When you talk about the power producing entities and the contracts that we have with them,
Yes.
there is talk of negotiation. It's one of the discussions that were held by this task force that were looking into these matters.
Yes.
Surely, from your perspective as an expert in this field, is it possible to be able to calculate what the cost of the investment was and over what period it is possible for them to have recovered what it is they put into it? Yes, an agreed amount of profit was there. It is understandable. But then there are circumstances that were not factored into this agreement, like COVID, like Russia, like Ukraine. There are many things. This prolonged drought.
Yeah.
Now, many factors that I may not even understand can bring about a necessity to renegotiate and look at the reality of this. Now, when this task force got into working out whatever they were doing in order to try and rationalize and bring sanity into this situation.
Yeah.
I'm certain they look into more things than even I can imagine. My question is this: is it possible for these contracts to be renegotiated, and is it possible for some of them to be actually terminated?
Well, these contracts run for 20 years. Let me start them. And when they are saying
They're supposed to run for 20 years.
for 20 years.
Yes.
Now, and even if a plant, and they are structured in a way that even if a plant does not produce anything for the 20 years, there is still money to pay back because they are being paid on capacity charge. So that is...
I think you've gone to the heart of what I'm asking.
Yes.
I am asking,
Yes.
that is based on a certain understanding of how it is they're supposed to recoup the
Yeah,
whatever
investment.
That I have understood that. That's why I started by asking, is there a way of determining whether that investment had been realized so that they are not at a loss? 20 years was a period that was determined as the period within which
Yes.
this could be done.
Yes.
But the reason why I'm asking the question is because it's unfortunate that very many such contracts in this country are usually fraught with things that we are not told about, and that the cost that we're even referring to don't necessarily relate to the reality of what it actually costs to do what we're being told is being done. That is really where I'm going with my question.
And I think you are right in what you are saying, because if the contracts, of course, I expect even the people who are investing in those power plants are expecting that much as we want to the payback period, we also need some profit.
Yep.
Now, even if they recouped the whole investment, they are now running on the profits, and even the profits are budgeted for. And you see, even when you expect some money in your pocket, much as it is your money, it is still has some budget you have allocated.
Yep.
So even if you tell them that you are going to forget about this profit, even if you have recovered your money, it's not going to be a very easy negotiating discussion. So even, and I am not even saying that it's not possible. I don't want to give them strength on the fact that we allow you not to agree. No, we are saying let them agree. But that discussion is another level, and we cannot, we cannot try to negotiate with them as a civil society organization. Ours is to just tell the government, this is what power is supposed to cost, and this is where we were at a certain time, this is where we are now, we need to get back to this. But now, even if they need to renegotiate, I would just pray that they consider all that, but I know most of them, of course, are selling power cheaper. Is only the capacity charge that is more. In fact, for example, even for a buy, it might be cheaper than Kenji, but due to the capacity charge, eventually the average becomes higher.
I think we're getting to that realization, which should have been gotten by the task force, that it's not an easy conversation to have when you say, go and renegotiate. All right? Yeah. So let's say, for example, Lake Turkana Wind Power Project has an installed capacity of 310 megawatts.
Yes.
Are we taking 310 megawatts from Loyangalani? We are not. But they have already invested.
That's what we're being charged for.
They have already invested.
Yes.
That. So did you sign a contract and say, okay, put up a 310 megawatt capacity
yes.
plant?
Yes.
If I've already put it up, how can you come and start telling me, okay, now you've already... It's like telling the expressway people, do that elevated road, and then now start charging for one lane.
Yes.
By the way, for the wind, I think people need to get to understand, and not just people, maybe even the people who are trying to negotiate for that contract. Wind, when you talk of... Let me explain a bit about the Lake Turkana. It has got 365 turbines of 850 megawatt. Yeah? 850 kilowatt. That brings it to if you multiply that, you'll get 310 megawatt. Now, a wind turbine is designed that it is going to be 850 kilowatt at a speed of perhaps 12 meters per second of speed of the wind.
Yeah.
Now, the wind can't be 12 meters per second throughout. It will sometimes be 6, other times it will be something. So even if you are running all the 365 turbines, you can only be generating maybe 250. Remember, there are times you need to schedule for maintenance.
Yes.
So they need to have negotiated on that the maximum we need you to be giving us is going to be 250. I am not sure how they negotiated, but people keep on thinking that 310 megawatt are supposed to be there and ready to be utilized. No.
Actually, I even think in my mind that there is a warehouse where you keep the 310.
No.
So if we use 200, we still have another
We
100.
don't have. In
Yes.
fact, we utilize the maximum that we get from that wind. Yeah. So when there is wind, in fact, when it is that the wind turbines stop generating at I think 4 meters per second of this, 4 meters per second. Below that, it will not give anything. So at around 9 meters per second, maybe or 12, based on the design, it will be giving the maximum of 850 kilowatt.
Yes.
Now, always we are in between 4 and 12, 4 and 12. So anytime there is some intermittent kind of a supply. So even when you are signing a contract, they should have signed on the basis of we can only guarantee
we
that
can only guarantee that we can give you this much and you will take this much.
Yes.
There's the other guarantee as well.
Yes.
There's a guarantee of I am going to put up my plant and finish my plant on the 30th of May.
Yes.
But the 30th of May, I'm ready to generate, take the power. We saw with Lake Turkana wind power that the plant is finished, but Ketraco has not finished putting up the transmission line.
Yeah.
So who was paying for the period where this is generating, but the power is not coming to Suswa?
Of course, it's the government, and maybe through us.
That's the taxpayer now,
It's
the
taxpayer,
consumer.
of course. Yes, it's the consumer because, and that's actually most of the problems that I have not found any contract by the government that has ended on the date that it had been said, including elections.
No project in Kenya.
Including elections that we are going to be doing elections for 2 days. It runs even we are on the TV screens for about 4 days. And so if it's only the rail, you see the SGR, that was a bit fast. But any other project, I think I've seen very few projects that the government will always hit the deadline. So now, even on that one, the challenge was that it was a government entity that was given that job.
Ketraco.
So, Ketraco. And see, if it had been given by to a different contractor, just the same as the people who are given the installation. And that was, I think, SECO. SECO is a Southern Engineering. Yeah, company or limited.
Company limited, yes.
Now, if they are the same ones who had been told, if you finish that before you finish the transmission also, it is your problem.
Yeah.
But you see, now you give a different entity that might have interest. Because even those payments, you see, you are supposed to pay those people without generating. And you are the same people signing that Ketraco, you're supposed to do this job.
Yeah.
And you are in government. So why would you not delay purposely? Because you can also get a cut there. You see, that is a challenge.
Yeah.
So it might not have been really a failure or unable to do. It might also have been designed to appear like that. I mean,
engineered to be this way so
to
that
be- because-
some money can be paid.
yeah, because like now, we always say that if you delay, like in contracts, big contract, you're normally told that we are supposed to finish this contract by this time, and then you'll pay us like 200 million. For every month you are going to delay my payment,
There's a penalty.
there's a penalty of like 2 million.
Yep.
I mean, I will tell you, just stay with the money. Stay with the money.
Let me not do the job.
Yeah, you stay the money for like a year, then the penalty is like 100 million.
Yeah.
Because even if you are given that money and you didn't have anywhere else to take it, it's better they stay with it than they pay the penalty. So it can be designed to be, it can be engineered to be deliberate.
I'm harping on this issue of, because that was a big ticket item. We are going to renegotiate the IPPs and the power will come down because these IPPs are criminals. They have just been here. They want to eat from our government. They are crooks. We have not seen any announcement of a result of negotiations with IPPs. And maybe, as I'm saying, maybe it's actually exposing the fact that it was not going to be an easy conversation as had been touted. Let's talk about even the thermal. You've told us Kipevu 1, Kipevu 2, big thermal generators are owned by Kenji.
Yeah, Kipevu 1, Kipevu 3.
So Kipevu 3.
Kipevu 2 was owned by Savo Power, operated by Watsila, and they closed. They are contracted in June last year. So those ones are out
Those ones are
automatically,
out of-
without
of
even
the
negotiation.
system.
Maybe the negotiation would have been, can we now extend further?
Just hold it.
Yeah.
We have one of the power generating companies out of the picture.
Yes, by design. It was supposed to be.
Yes,
ended.
yes. So what that means is, I'm speaking as a layman,
Yes.
whatever we were paying to them, we no longer pay.
Yes.
Okay. Eric, you see where I'm going with this, don't you?
That was 75 megawatt.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, whatever we're paying for this, since their departure, did we notice a reduction in our costs?
Oh, no. We are still at 4.63. Yeah. In fact, it is higher. And I have pointed out, and I want all consumers to know that we are paying 4.63 Kenya shillings per kilowatt hour for fuel cost for the 4th month in a row without any fluctuation. Whether the price of the price of oil has gone higher or lower or whatever, or we have reduction in thermal generation, or we have increased, it has been stuck at 4.63. That should raise some alarm.
An issue.
It's an issue.
Who's the largest thermal generator in terms of contributing to the grid? Is it Kenji?
It's Kenji, of course, because they have several. They had the Embakasi and several others. But there's actually a list. But
so even when you come to diesel powered,
yes.
Kenji is still
there.
The largest.
Yes.
So the renegotiation here, we are talking about, let's go to IPPs.
It's the government to talk to itself. It's the government to talk to itself.
I think we've gotten to the heart of the matter, haven't we?
Bas. If we were to look at, so what should happen? What is it that you say? What should happen to bring the cost of power down? Simply, directly, just telling them, Wananchi, look out for, if this doesn't happen, forget it.
I will point out about two things. One, I have always mentioned, let us stop taxation on power. And I have said we will get...
Stop completely or reduce it?
Completely.
Why?
We will get 13% because it is possible. I mean, there are so many things that, you see, when you reduce taxation or you evade taxation on power, there are other things that people will do with power and you'll still get your tax back. Yeah. Because it will increase production, and as a result, production
it
you
will
also
also introduce consumption.
It will introduce more consumption.
Job creation.
You see. So there will be more things to tax. And that is only 13%. And as I always say, Kenya Power normally gets around, we discuss with them and they are getting around 13 to 16 billion per month. So how much money must the government get from there? I mean, they only get around maybe even 6 billion.
But bear in mind, when we talk about Kenya Power,
Yes.
it isn't owned by the government.
It is owned by the government, half of it.
No, it is not. The government is a shareholder. When you say a major shareholder, doesn't mean you own it. It just means,
Of course.
Yes. And so there is the question of the other partners with the government who, of necessity, are business people who will want to make money from it. So
As long as it's still profitable,
yes.
that the thing is, can it guarantee profitability? If you reduce tax on power, does that translate to losses to Kenya Power?
Not
No,
necessarily. Not necessarily.
Yeah. So that's what we are saying.
So
It's the government to
we,
decide.
the shareholders, want to see.
Let me tell you one thing. This government, Kengen, is also almost owned by the government, the whole of it. Ketraco is owned by the government.
100%.
Now, Kenya Power, 50.1.
Yes.
Yeah? So now, when one of the three is making more profit, I mean, they are also taxing Kengen, I guess. But you see, it is taxing itself.
They do, but and Kengen always makes a profit.
Yeah.
And it makes a profit.
Always.
Yes.
Yes.
So that is why we are saying, if I was to be asked what needs to be done, and I'm not saying that I be told to do it, because again, that is another job. But I am saying, in terms of if I am told, if you are going to structure these things so that it can be reduced, it will be two things. One, you avoid taxes, and that will reduce 13%.
Okay.
You see, avoiding tax completely, that will be
Okay.
13%.
Second,
The second one is that you negotiate with the IPPs, yeah, and that will give only 12%. That will be,
total 25.
that is 25%. You see how, so we are still far from 33.
Yeah.
Now, this 33, you might now go to the system losses, which is going to reduce 2.65%.
So we are not 27.
We are on 27, isn't it?
So
now-
we just simply need 6% more
Yeah,
to
6
arrive at 6.
Now, the 6%, you can now only go to Kenya Power and tell them, you guys, you're saying you're making a loss. You will make more loss.
Your
Because
operating
we need
costs are
these
too
6
high.
shillings from you. And we are also saying that it is not complicated because you remember we were at 42% less in 2013. So what was happening during that time? That
So
is
we-
basically what I would go back.
We target to getting back there.
Yes.
Let's hope that in the next coming days, we are going to get something from the Energy CS.
It's really my hope.
Ambassador Monica Juma. She's addressing the media this morning.
Yeah.
primarily on the matter of fuel prices. But let's wait and see. Ndereva, thank you very much for joining us. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much.